So a little bit about Carle. We are located in East Central Illinois, so that's about 2 hours south of Chicago. So we have a fairly large patient catchment area. We kind of take care of the entire southeastern corner of the state of Illinois. Our main hospital is located in Urbana, Illinois, which is also the home of the University of Illinois. And then we have 2 additional hospitals, one in Hoopeston, which is about an hour to the northeast, and Richland Memorial, which is about 2 hours to the south. We also operate about 12 outpatient clinic locations, most of which have some form of imaging within them. We are a small to mid-size radiology group, having 27 radiologists system-wide, and I would describe us as being a fairly subspecialized group. We have dedicated breast imagers, dedicated neuroradiologists, interventional radiologists, and then the bulk of our group practice kind of body imaging and general radiology. So just another sort of little history timeline about Carle. Really the most important thing to key in on here is 2010. This is when our physician group, which was a physician-owned clinic, merged with the hospital. And we also have our own health insurance company associated with that called Health Alliance. So we are a vertically integrated health system with a hospital, a physician group, and a health insurance company. And really why this is important and how this ties into the analytics piece is because we operate, you know, in this realm of working with our payer and trying to develop population health initiatives. It's become increasingly important to have access to good data and to use that data to guide decision making. So this is where the mPower product has really helped us a lot. So as I mentioned, we have 27 radiologists serving the 3 hospitals, and we also have some embedded radiologists in some of our areas. For instance, our orthopedic sports medicine area has a dedicated musculoskeletal radiologist that we try to keep on site for procedures and consultations. So let's dive into the meat of the presentation here. So there's 2 specific areas that I want to share with you today. How I have used the data analytics through the Nuance products to solve problems within our practice. So one of them is this concept of cherry picking. And for those of you, if there's radiologists signed on, you know what this means. This is people kind of picking and choosing the studies they want to read and maybe leaving the more difficult or onerous cases to be read by somebody else. We were getting a lot of complaints about this. There was a lot of dissatisfaction among the radiology team. And from a quality standpoint and a safety standpoint, this was a problem because some of these cases, the really difficult to read cases that were being ignored, they were not being read in a timely manner. And so we wanted to address that. The other scenario that we're going to discuss is a situation that arose regarding our night coverage staffing and how the radiologists who are working the night shift were complaining about excessive workloads, difficulty meeting SLA requirements, and really kind of crying out that they were on the ramp towards burnout. So we felt that needed to be addressed as well. So let's talk about the cherry picking problem first. Really we wanted to answer the question, how much of a problem this is, how often is it occurring, and who's doing it. And this first manifests itself, obviously this has been going on for a long time, but people started to complain about it, probably about 2 years ago. And this predated the point in time when we had access to mPower. And so what I chose to do at that time initially was to create this concept called the body suffer score. And for those of you who are familiar with the fitness app Strava, you'll recognize this because they used to give you this quote unquote suffer score at the end of your workout. So what I decided to do was to use PowerScribe, which tracks the number of exams that people do over a period of time, and try to identify those areas that, you know, people were sort of, that we consider to be the more difficult or time-consuming or less desirable tasks. And we identified 5 exams, mainly CTA exams, thyroid ultrasound, foot CTs for some reason were being left on the list, fluoroscopy, and then the chest, abdomen, pelvis oncology follow-ups. So what we started doing was tracking these, the volumes per radiologist in the body section. And we were able to give people a score and kind of determine, you know, who was working harder. That morphed into then, once we had mPower available, we were able to utilize mPower and generate a recurrent report to do the exact same thing. So initially, before we had mPower, this was a very manual process. Our reading room assistant was having to go in and manually look this up in PowerScribe. Once we got mPower available, she was able to set it up so that she could create these recurring reports every quarter, and it became much less time-consuming and much easier for her to perform that task. And as we started to track this, you know, we identified some trends in people who were sort of falling outside of the curve in terms of interpreting some of these onerous types of exams. And we had a little fun with it. So, you know, we would, every quarter when this would come out, we would find the people who had worked a little bit harder, who had suffered the most, and we would crown them the king or queen of Sufferlandia. And for the people who read the most thyroid ultrasounds, they would be the Duke or Duchess of Goiterville. So kind of a tongue-in-cheek and humorous way of kind of calling out people who were working hard and maybe trying to encourage those who weren't pulling their weight to work a little bit harder. So this is an example of the type of data that we were able to extract from mPower for the body suffer score. So we would display it very graphically, and you can see, you know, Dr. Clark and Dr. Sumner and Flea were able to, you know, they were doing a good job, and we actually broke it down by the actual exam type, so you could see kind of what was driving the suffering. For instance, Dr. Clark was reading a lot of thyroid ultrasound, and that's what was driving his suffer score, whereas you know, other people might be reading more CTA or might be doing more fluoroscopy shifts. But so this was a way of showing who was suffering the most, and maybe somebody like Dr. Lee who maybe wasn't pulling their weight. So we did this for a while, and we shared the data, and, you know, we had a little bit of fun with that. But in the end, you know, like a lot of things, you know, people see this and then they become a little bit immune to the data, and we weren't getting the type of behavior change that we had hoped. As time went on, the complaints began or continued to file in about the cherry picking. You know, some of the radiologists were getting very frustrated when they were on service with other radiologists, and they felt like they were being dumped on. And so I felt, as a practice leader, I had to step in and kind of, you know, take a different approach and try to get a little more granular with this. So as time went on, we kind of started to notice a little bit of shift in the types of exams that were being ignored on the work list. And the chest CTs, and we do a lot of chest CTs in our practice, so and they're all for pulmonary nodule follow-up. So we are located in a geographic area of the country that has a high endemic fungal pulmonary disease, and so we have a lot of pulmonary nodules that we find on either chest X-ray or chest CT, and we have to follow those up. And these can be very time-consuming and very onerous, and so those exams were tending to get left on the list. Apparently, there's also a lot of goiters where we live because we do a lot of thyroid ultrasound, and those can get very difficult to read, particularly when there's 20 different nodules, and so people have a tendency to ignore those. So I took a different approach and started using mPower to track on a sort of a monthly basis or a quarterly basis the total number of CT and ultrasound that the body radiologists were reading. Now, I only focused on these two modalities because in our practice, these are the two modalities that everyone in the body/general section reads and should feel comfortable reading. We do limit our MR interpretation to some of our subspecialists, so it really wouldn't have been fair to track that. So we focused on CT and ultrasound, and that was where we were noticing the greatest degree of variability and avoidance anyway. So we tracked these difficult-to-read cases as a percentage of the total volume that the body radiologists were reading. But I also wanted to look at, well, is the converse true as well? And so there were a couple of exams that we identified as kind of easier to read that seem to be disappearing off the work list more frequently, or those are the ones that were being cherry-picked. And those were right upper quadrant ultrasounds, pelvic ultrasounds, and CT of the abdomen and pelvis with contrast. So we kind of ran two different reports, one of avoidance and one of, picking out easy cases. In order to do this, it was really pretty easy. I simply used the advanced search functioning in mPower, put in the dates, and just ran the volumes for modalities. And this was able to generate a large data set that was then easily exported into Excel, where all of the real sort of data manipulation was performed. It was really quite easy, and once I had that, I was able to set up some templates within Excel and just kind of plug and play every month as I go through this. So when we ran that data and we started looking at who was cherry picking and who was avoiding the difficult cases, what we found, and this initial data set was performed over a 6-month period at the end of 2018. So we found some pretty significant variability. So on average, these thyroid ultrasounds and chest CTs make up close to 13% of the total volume of our CT and ultrasound. And so what we would expect is that radiologists kind of just reading right down the list would encounter these with similar frequency, and that everybody would kind of be around that number. And as you can see, some people are. The ones that are highlighted in green, are pretty close to the mean, or at least within a standard deviation of the mean. But you can see there's one doctor, Dr. McCartney, who was well below that number. And, everybody had kind of suspected this, and a lot of the complaints that were coming in were targeted at Dr. McCartney, but it really helped to have this data available to prove it, okay? Now, if we look at kind of who's taking it easy, and this is the data that revolves around picking out the ultrasound of the right upper quadrants and the pelvic ultrasounds and the CT abdomen pelvis, we can kind of see our two outliers here. So our mean is about 30%, which a lot of people are kind of in that range of plus or minus 1 standard deviation. But you can see a couple of people, Dr. Sumner and Dr. McCartney, Dr. McCartney is approaching 50%, which is pretty significant. Now, if we go back, we'll also also noticed that Dr. Sumner was kind of on the low end of the thyroid ultrasound and the CT chest. So these two individuals became kind of clear that they were, you know, cherry picking and perhaps avoiding the harder work and leaving it for, you know, more easy work, and the data certainly supports that. So that information gave me the ammunition, if you will, to sit down with these individuals and show them the numbers and how they compare to their peers, and also tell what the expectation would be. So having that average and the standard deviation and where people lie, I was able to sit down with Dr. McCartney and say, listen, this is where you're at, this is where we need you to be, and we're going to start watching this every month because I'm getting these complaints and people are upset, and we need to have more harmony in the group, and we also need to make sure that the exams are being interpreted in an appropriate amount of time, and we're meeting our SLA requirements. So that data that I presented in the previous slides was from quarters 3 and 4 of 2008. I sat down and had some counseling with Dr. McCartney and Dr. Sumner regarding this behavior in mid-February of this year. So the slide that we're looking at right now is from March. And you can see it's pretty dramatic, right? Dr. McCartney was at 1.87% for quarters 3 and 4 of 2018. And now he's tracking right along with everybody else. He's at 12.36%, right at the average for everybody else. And Dr. Sumner has made some improvements as well. So this is really powerful, I think. This data and being able to sit down and show people numbers and show how they compare to their peers, it's not about perceptions, it's about reality, it's about actual behavior. And so, you know, where people can kind of say like, oh, you know, they're just kind of picking on me and I'm not doing this. Now I have the tools to sit down with people and say, yes, you are, the data shows that, and these are the expectations moving forward. So I think this is a great success story for our group. Our body section is much happier now that the work is being distributed more evenly. I can tell you I was probably one of the individuals who was suffering most because I was picking up all these chest CTs, and when I look at my own numbers now, I've actually dipped below the mean because, you know, these studies are being read by other people. So it's improved my personal satisfaction. I know that other people in the group have come to me and say how much nicer it is that everybody's just kind of reading straight down the list in the order of which things are supposed to be read. So I'm very happy with the way this turned out. It was extremely easy to use mPower to extract this data, export it to Excel, and then manipulate it in a way that was meaningful and then present it to the group. So that's our success story for cherry picking. So let's transition just a little bit and talk about another practice issue that arose recently with our night staff. So earlier this year, I received some feedback. We have 4 dedicated nighttime radiologists, and they work 7 days straight on night shifts, which are 12-hour shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and then they have an extended period off and rotate this through. So we're very busy. We're a level 1 trauma center. We're a large referral center. We have a lot of inpatient volume. These guys are working hard, and it seems like a lot of the volume was continuing to grow, and it was growing in the after hours. And where it really started to show up was on weekends. So we have 2 individuals who cover most of our weekend shifts in our practice, and then the remainder are distributed equally among the rest of the group. And for whatever reason, the days on the weekends were getting busier. The nighttime guys were coming in at 7 p.m., and there was still a significant amount of work being left over at 7 when the day crew left. And so they were starting their shift way behind and just getting buried. And so this was causing a lot of problems in terms of maintaining turnaround times. These guys were burning out, and so I needed to look at this. So again, I went back to mPower and tried to pull some volume and RVU productivity numbers and kind of focused on the first quarter of this year to see what it showed. And as we dug in, what I was able to find is over a typical 24-hour period on the weekend, our practice was producing about 191 RVUs in that period. And this is where mPower is very useful, is that there's a function in the search where you're able to dial in on specific periods of the day. So you can do it hour by hour, different blocks of time. So I was actually able to break that down into the different shifts. So we looked at the night shift productivity from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and determined that was 76 RVUs on average, and the daytime crew was producing about 115 RVUs. It's also important to note that mPower allows you to track not just when an exam was dictated, but when it was completed and ready to read. So that was the metric that I used, because I didn't want to, if I would have tracked it by when the report was generated, that would have really skewed it towards the nighttime crew because they were absorbing some of the daytime work. What I wanted to know was, what is the rate at which work is being produced in our practice, and how do I staff my practice accordingly to meet those needs and not overburden any individual radiologist. So I focused on when the work was available to be read, not when it was actually read, because they don't always match up. And what we found was, breaking it down by hour, the night shift was reading at a rate of about 6.3 RVUs per hour. And that's kind of a lot. We had some consultants come in recently, and they certainly recommend kind of staying right about that 6.5 RVU per hour for a weekend shift. So these guys were operating kind of at the top of their recommended work, right? And then the daytime radiologists were a little bit less busy. They were going to have to average about 4.8 RVUs per hour. Now, it's important to note that this data is over the entire shift. And so we work 12-hour shifts on the weekend. So the daytime crew comes in at 7 a.m. and works till 7 p.m. And there were two of them, one body radiologist, one neuroradiologist. And then we have one overnight radiologist that was coming in at 7 p.m. and working till 7 a.m. So we all know, those of us who've worked weekends, that that's not the whole story. Some parts of the day were busier than others. I can tell you, coming in at 7 a.m., a lot of days, we'd be twiddling our thumbs. There just wasn't enough work to do. The night, they do our morning portables very early. Our overnight radiologists were reading those. We would come in and kind of just wait for stuff to happen. So, again, we wanted to look at a sort of a larger time period, went back and reviewed 6 months worth of data, and kind of took a look at the specific time periods, okay? So what I wanted to do is, if my night radiologists are complaining that they're getting behind in those early hours of their shift, what can I do to alleviate that? And in my mind, the simplest solution would be to try to stagger the shifts in some manner. So in order to do that, I went back to mPower. I employed the different time periods, looking at the productivity levels in different parts of the day. We all know that the late afternoon hours were busy, so between 4 and 7 p.m., we were producing 11.2 RVUs per hour. But we have 2 radiologists working during that time, so they're operating at 4.6 RVUs per radiologist per hour. It's busy, but it's not overwhelming. Then what we found out was between 7 to 9 p.m., that rate of production goes up to 9.4 RVUs per hour. And guess what? That radiologist was by himself. And if there was any work left over from the day crew, they were having to absorb that as well. That is well above the metrics that were provided to us by our consultants. So you can see down at the bottom of the slide, weekday target productivity levels, we want to be in the 4.5 to 5 RVU per hour range. Weekend targets, we're looking at 5.5 to 6. Certainly 6.5 is up there, and it's at the top end. Looking at the morning hours, which we knew were not nearly as busy, that showed that between 7 and 9 a.m., our group is only producing 3.9 RVUs per hour, and that's split up between 2 different radiologists. So really, the morning radiologists that come in at 7 a.m. were doing less than 2 RVUs per radiologist per hour based on the amount of work that was being produced during that time. Now, it's worth noting that like many practices, we do sometimes have difficulty keeping up with our x-rays, and some of those will carry over into the weekend. So there's always plain films around for the weekend crew to read. But even then, you know, there was still capacity to absorb that extra work. So from 4 to 7 p.m., the doctors were kind of working at the top of their recommended productivity rates, but not overwhelming. The night radiologists coming on shift were working well beyond their recommended productivity rates. So what this told me is these guys aren't just whining, they are truly hurting, they are overworked. And as a practice leader, I need to step in and do something about that. I also determined that and proved with the productivity data that mPower was able to provide that there's insufficient work produced during the early morning hours to justify having 2 radiologists on duty at that time. And you know, the work produced between 7 and 9 p.m. far exceeds the recommended productivity rate and would be compounded by any kind of a backlog left over from the day. So we gave the group a few options, staggered shifts, utilizing teleradiology, or try to somehow shift volume from the night to the day hours. You know, none of these were perfect. They all had pros and cons. But at the end of the day, we thought that the easiest solution and the most impactful solution would be to stagger the shifts. So what we started doing was, instead of bringing in both radiologists in at 7 a.m. in the morning on weekends, our body radiologist still starts at 7 and works solo between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. At 9 a.m., the neuroradiologist who's on the weekend comes on duty. And since they're now working a little bit later into the evening, we all have home reading stations. We've allowed them to work remotely, which is also, you know, it's a little bit of a satisfier. So we're kind of giving and taking, right? We're making them work a couple hours later into the evening, but they're able to do so remotely. So, you know, they can take a quick break and grab dinner with their family, you know, and it's not as cumbersome of a shift as if they were working on site. So we, you know, I even used mPower to look at, well, we're going to have a body radiologist on staff alone for 2 hours in the morning. And there was this worry of, you know, what if some complex neuro case comes in? And we are a primary stroke center, so we do get a number of stroke patients and, you know, the neuro CTAs and all those that need to be interpreted. And some of our body radiologists are comfortable reading those, and some of them aren't. So we looked at that, and mPower allowed me to dive in on that specific exam type during those hours and determine that really it's a pretty rare occurrence. And in those rare occurrences, when those complex neuro cases presented themselves in that 2-hour period, we would maintain the option of sending those off to teleradiology to be read quickly and then overread by the neuroradiologist on site or on duty for our institution at 9 a.m. or whenever they had time to overread it at that point. So that seemed to work out pretty well, and everybody was happy with that. So we started doing that shift back in early May, and you can see sort of graphically as we look at the different time periods during the day, how the rate of work production was kind of skyrocketing towards the end of the evening there at 7 to 9 p.m. So by simply shifting the neuroradiologist's work hours by 2 hours, now that really busy time in the early evening from 7 to 9 p.m. is covered by 2 radiologists instead of 1. So we're able to sort of even out that rate of work, and our night crew is more satisfied. They have a more reasonable work expectations made of them during that time period. The ER is happy. They're getting their reports turned around more quickly. And overall, it's been a good move, a very simple fix, and has improved physician satisfaction both within our department and outside of our department, as well as improved patient care because we're maintaining our turnaround times and getting those trauma cases and those stroke cases read even faster, and having that subspecialist neuroradiology coverage later in the day when they're more likely to encounter those types of cases makes way more sense than having them on duty from 7 to 9 a.m. when those cases were somewhat more sparse. So this was a good move that we made, that we were really able to justify and promote through the use of analytics. And I am not an expert on analytics or data management by any stretch, but I will tell you that mPower is extremely easy to use. It's extremely intuitive, and it's very easy for me to just sit down and make these, create these searches and run these reports and have information fed to me very quickly so that I can make actionable decisions in a more timely manner. So, in closing, as a physician, and I actually, even though it wasn't mentioned in my introduction, so one of my tasks here at Carle is I sit on the Physician Wellness Committee. So I am very keyed into the concept of physician burnout. I don't think you can't open up a medical journal these days and not see articles written about burnout. It's very real, and it impacts almost every medical practice, not just radiology. And I'm keyed into this, and when my physicians are reporting burnout or exhibiting signs of burnout, it's my duty as the physician leader to address that. So, we were able to throw this out to the group, demonstrate how much harder the night guys were working, and really, I was expecting a lot of pushback in terms of working these longer hours on the weekend. But really, when people saw that their partners were suffering and there was data and numbers to back it up, it was a pretty easy decision to make. And really, isn't that what data is supposed to do? It's not about numbers. It's about people. It's about relationships. It's about patient care and safety. So it's not all about numbers. And it's just another tool for us leaders to use to make our practices better and improve the care of our patients. So that's all I have in terms of the formal presentation. Happy to entertain any questions that anybody has.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Jimenez. I will say again, you're welcome to enter questions in the Q&A panel of the WebEx window, and we will work through them. We did get a few in, so we'll start there to let people have time to ask additional questions. The first question was, how has mPower and access to data improved your ability to lead your radiology department?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's interesting. A few months ago, I was asked by our leadership development team to put together a small video instructional program regarding for their leadership module, and the topic I was given was conflict resolution. Now, I'm not sure what they'd heard about my department or me or whatever, or why I was given that topic, but I started thinking about how do I resolve conflict, and so I don't have a ton of conflict, but and I don't know if they were looking for some type of, interpersonal relationship type answer, but really what I came back to was data. Conflict is many times based on perceptions that aren't necessarily reality, right? So people think that somebody is doing something that they're not supposed to do, or a workflow is not operating the way that it should. Data gives you the ability to objectively address these concerns and resolve conflicts, whether it's within your department or outside of your department. I've had numerous instances where clinicians from other departments may have a complaint about turnaround times or report quality or anything along those lines. And the first thing I do is open up mPower and start collecting data. In fact, just yesterday, one of the physicians one of the physician leads in our organization for quality and risk management sent me a link about an article saying that there's too much unnecessary imaging on hospital inpatients getting head CTs for delirium, okay? He's like, do we do this? I'm like, oh, you bet we do. And within 5 minutes, I had done an mPower search, just punching in the word delirium. And I sent him over a 12-month period Excel file containing over 800 head CT exams that were performed for that indication. I'm like, here you go, take a look. And he was like, wow, how'd you do that so fast? I'm like, I have instant access to data. And I use this on a weekly basis, whether it's somebody bringing me a problem from within the department or outside the department. Having the access to data has made me a better leader.
Great, thank you very much. Here's another question. What advantages does mPower provide in data analytics compared to other more traditional methods?
I would have to say the number one thing is speed. I'm sure, like most of the participants, we have a data analytics and data management department here at Carle, but they serve the entire organization. They serve the hospital, the physician group, the health insurance company. If I put in a request for, if I needed this productivity data, for instance, and I put in a request for it, it might be 6 weeks before I get a report back. And that report may not be accurate or may have something in it that I need to change, and then I'm back to the drawing board. Having the ability to do this on my own, and really, this is running through our X-ray reports and our imaging reports. There's so much different clinical data that lives there. I mean, somebody at the ACR a couple of years ago made the point of, radiology isn't just about image interpretation, it's become about data management. And I agree with that, because not only are we interpreting images, but so much medical data passes through our department that we have access to. We can really impact patient care on a population basis just through the data that's within our reports. So really, having that instant access and being able to make actionable decisions in a short period of time is a game changer. The other thing is that ability to make those small changes to the report. So every now and then, I sit out and try to gather some data on a problem, and I start running a report, and then I realize, oh, gee, I really should have changed that parameter or made this, included this other exam type. So easy to do with mPower. I just go back to the search, change the parameter, rerun it, send the data back out. I can't even imagine what would happen if I had to go through our IMA department. It would take weeks. And so really, a lot of times, time is money, and you can't wait weeks or months to make decisions. You have to have the data available to make decisions right away. And so that's the power.
Wonderful. One other question, but I will tell people if you do want to ask a question, you can use the Q&A panel within the WebEx widget window, and we will get to as many questions as we are able. The final question that I have right now is, do you have any other success stories that you can share?
Well, one that comes to mind is, we have recently hired a radiology results coordinator. I think like a lot of radiology groups, this whole concept of results tracking has come to the forefront. So, we do use Nuance critical results, and we send those, those alerts out at the time of interpretation. But, there's this big gap in terms of making sure that follow-up appointments are being made. And we decided about a year ago that we were going to step up and own that. We have the data. Like I said, it lives in our department. And, we've had a lot of discussions over the years like, well, you know what, that's not our job. It's the clinician's job. Or it's like, but, we've made it our job. And we have this data available. We have easy access to it. And if we can impact patient care and provide value, even if it isn't, quote, unquote, our job, then we're benefiting the organization and we're providing value to patients. So we are using mPower currently to assist the results tracking coordinator in identifying. There's a pre-built module, as many of you know, if you're using the product, that shows you overdue follow-ups. And we've made some slight modifications to that to optimize it, and we are going through this backlog and trying to determine which patients need to come back for follow-up. And we've caught a couple of cases that, there were chest CTs that were overdue, and we brought them in, and there were findings on there. So great success story there.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much. That is the last question that we had, Dr. Jimenez. I want to thank you very much for taking time to share your stories with us today.
That's my pleasure.
A very informative session. To all of the participants online, thank you for taking time from your busy summer day to join us here. We will be reaching out to you with a copy of the PowerPoint deck that Dr. Jimenez used today, as well as a recording. We thank you again, everyone, for your time, and hope you are able to join us at a future event, be it webinar, trade show, road show. We just like to keep hearing these great stories. Thanks so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
That does conclude our conference for today. Thank you for your participation and for using AT&T Executive Teleconference. You may now disconnect.